Outgrowing God, Richard Dawkins. Chapter 4, The Good Book. The animals went in 2 by 2. We love the story of Noah's Ark, Mr. and Mrs. Giraffe, Mr. and Mrs. Elephant, Mr. and Mrs. Penguin, and all the other couples patiently working up the gangway into the great wooden ship, welcomed by a beaming Mr. and Mrs. Noah. Sweet. But wait, why was there a worldwide flood in the first place? God was angry with the sinfulness of humankind, all except Noah, who found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So God decided to drown every man, woman, and child, plus all the animals except one pair of each kind. Not so sweet after all. Not so sweet after all? Whether or not we think God is an entirely fictional character, we can still judge whether he is good or bad, just as we might judge Lord Voldemort or Darth Vader or Long John Silver or Professor Moriarty or Goldfinger or Cruella de Vil. So throughout this chapter, when I say God did so and so, I mean the Bible says that God did so and so, and from these accounts we can judge if the God character is a nice character, whether the stories about him are fact or fiction. I shall do so, and you will no doubt feel free to decide for yourself whether you think it's still possible to love God in spite of everything, as a man called Job did. Man called Job did. In the following story from the Bible, Job was a very good, righteous man who loved God. This pleased God so much that he had a sort of bet with Satan about Job. Satan thought Job was good and well behaved and loved God only because he was fortunate, rich, and healthy, with a nice wife and 10 lovely children. God bet Satan that Job would go on being good and go on loving and worshipping him. Even if he lost all his good fortune, God gave Satan permission to test Job by depriving him of everything. And Satan dully said about it, "Poor Job, his cattle and sheep all died. His servants were all killed. His camels were stolen. His house blew down in a gale, and all his 10 children died." But God won the argument because, even in the face of such provocation, Job never became close with God and refused to stop loving and worshiping him. Satan still wouldn't admit defeat, though, so God gave him permission to test Job even further. This time Satan covered Job's whole body with boils, like the boils God inflicted on the Egyptians, caused by bacteria, as we now know, though the author of the book of Job didn't, and presumably God and Satan did. Still, Job's faith held firm. He didn't stop loving God, so God finally rewarded Job by culling the boils and giving him lots more wealth. His wife had lots more children, and they all lived happily ever after. Pity about the 10 dead children and all the other people who'd been killed because of the death. But as people often say, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. Like the Noah myth, It's just story. It's just a story. It didn't happen. As with most books in the Bible, we don't know who wrote the book of Job, and we don't know whether the author himself, it probably was a himself rather than a herself, thought there was a real man called Job. He could have been using fiction to teach a lesson. This is quite likely because the book of Job consists of lengthy dialogues between Job and his friends, known as Job's comforters, about moral questions and duty to God. But whatever the author's intention, huge numbers of devout Christians and Jews still think it's a real story about a real suffering man called Job. Devout Muslim too. For the story of Job is in the Quran, so is the story of Noah. And the very same people think the scriptures are our best guide on how to be good. All these devout people think God Himself is a supremely good role model. Here's another story, a very upsetting one, also about God testing somebody to see whether he really loved God. Imagine that. When you were a child, your father woke you one morning and said, "It's fine day. How would you like to come with me for a walk in the country?" You might quite fancy the idea. So off you go for a nice day together. After a while, your father stops to gather wood. He piles it up and you help him because you enjoy bonfires. But now, when the bonfire is ready to light, something terrible happens, utterly unexpected. Your father sees you, throws you on top of the pile of wood, and ties you down so you can't move. You scream with horror. Is he going to roast you on top of the bonfire? It gets worse. Your father produces a knife, raises it above his head, and you are now in no doubt. No doubt. Your father is about to run his knife through you. He's going to kill you and then set fire to your body. Your own father, the father who told you bedtime stories when you were little, told you the names of flowers and birds, and your dear father who gave you presents, comforted you when you were afraid of the dark. How could this be happening? Suddenly he stops. He looks up at the sky with a strange expression on his face, as though carrying on a conversation with himself in his head. He puts away the knife. It unties you and tries to explain what has happened. But you are so paralyzed with horror and fear that you can scarcely hear his words. Eventually he makes you understand. It was all God's doing. God had ordered your father to kill you and offer you up as a burnt sacrifice, but it turned out to be just a tease, a test of your father's loyalty to God. Your father had to prove to God that he loved God so much that he was even prepared to kill you if God ordered him to do so. He had to prove to God that he loved God even more than he loved his own dear child. As soon as God saw that your father was really prepared to go through with it, God intervened just in time. Gotcha. April Fool. I didn't really mean it. Yes, it was a good joke, wasn't it? Is it possible to imagine a worse trick to play on someone? A trick calculated to scar a child for life and poison a father-child relationship forever. But that's exactly what the Bible says God did. Read the whole story in Genesis chapter 22. The father was Abraham. The child was his son Isaac. The same story is told in Quran chapter 37. verse 99 to 111. Here the name of the son is not mentioned, and there is a tradition in Islam that it was Abraham's other son with a different mother, Ismail. In the Quran version, Abraham had a dream in which he saw himself sacrificing his son. Just a dream was enough to persuade him that Allah was telling him to do so, and, and he asked his son's opinion. Amazingly, the son encouraged his father to go ahead and sacrifice him. According to another Islamic tradition, this version isn't in the Quran itself. Satan tried to persuade Abraham not to do this terrible deed. This would seem to make the devil the good guy in the story, but Abraham, preferring his dream, drove him away by pelting him with stones. Muslims symbolically reenact this stoning in the annual festival called Eid. If you were Ismail, could you ever forgive your father? If you were Abraham, could you ever forgive God? If anything like this happened in modern times, Abraham would be locked up for terrible cruelty to his child. Can you imagine what the judge would say if a man pleaded, "But I was only following orders"? Orders from whom? Well, your owner. I heard this voice in my head, or I had this dream. What did you think if you were on jury? Would you think it was a good enough excuse, or would you send Abraham to prison? Fortunately, there is no reason to suppose it really happened, like most stories in the Bible, as we saw in chapter 2 and 3. There's no good evidence for it. No evidence indeed that Abraham and Isaac even existed. Hardly any more than, say, Little Red Riding Hood. And that's a pretty upsetting story too, for all that everybody knows it's fiction. But the point is that whether fiction or fact, the Bible is still held up to us as the good book, and its central character, God, is held up as a supremely good. Many Christians still take the Bible literally as historical fact. As we shall see in chapter 5, they think it's impossible to be good, impossible even to know what good means without God. In both these stories, God testing Abraham and God testing Job, I can't help feeling that the God character is not only cruel, but, well, insecure. It's all though God is like a jealous wife in a novel, who is so uncertain of her husband's fidelity that she deliberately tries to trap him in unfaithfulness, persuades an attractive woman friend, perhaps, to tempt him, just to prove to him herself that he will remain loyal to her. And if God is supposed to know everything, you might think he'd know in advance how Abram would behave when put to the test. In the Bible, the God character often describes himself as jealous. At one point, he even says his name is jealous, but whether we're ordinary people are jealous, or romantic rivals, or business competitors, God is jealous of rival gods, sometimes with good reason, as we saw in chapter 1. The early Hebrews were not wholly monotheistic in the modern sense. They were loyal to Yahweh as their tribal God, But that didn't mean David adopted the existence of rival tribes' God. They just thought their Yahweh was more powerful and more deserving of their support, and sometimes they were tempted to worship other gods with terrifying results if their own God caught them at it. On one occasion, so the Bible tells us, the Israelites' legendary leader Moses was up a mountain talking with God. When Moses had been gone rather a long time, the people began to wonder if he was ever coming back. They persuaded Moses' brother Aaron to collect a lot of gold from everybody, melt it down, and make them a new god while Moses wasn't looking, a golden calf. They bowed down and worshipped the golden calf. That may seem odd, but worshipping statues of animals, including bulls, was quite common among local tribes at the time. Moses didn't know his people were cheating on God, but God himself could see exactly what the Israelites were up to. Mad with jealousy, he went Moses storming down the mountain to put a stop to it. Moses seized the golden calf, burnt it, ground it to powder, mixed the powder with water, and made the people drink it. One of the clans of Israel, the tribe of Levi, hadn't fall for the golden calf, so God, through Moses, ordered each Levite to pick up a sword and kill as many of other tribesmen as they could. This amounted to a total of about 3,000 dead. Even this wasn't enough to satisfy God's jealous rage. He sent a plague to ravage the people who survived. If you know what's good for you, you'd better not mess with this God character. Above all, don't you dare look at any other gods. What had Moses been doing up the mountain with God? Among other things, he'd been taking delivery of the famous Ten Commandments, carved on tablets of stone. He carried them down with him, but such was his fury when he saw the golden calf. He dropped the tablets and broke them. Never mind, God later gave him a spare set, and we are told in two separate places in the Bible what they said. If you ask Christians today why they think their religion is a force for good, they will very often cite the Ten Commandments. But when I've asked them what the Ten Commandments actually are, I find they often can remember only one: thou shalt not kill. I'd say that's a pretty obvious rule for a good life, a rule that should hardly need to be carved in stone. But as we shall see in chapter 5, it turns out to have meant only thou shalt not kill members of thine own tribe, thine own tribe. God had no problem with killing foreigners, as we will see later in this chapter. The God of the Old Testament was continually urging his chosen people to slaughter other tribes, and with a bloodthirsty ruthless, ruthlessness it's hard to find in any other work of fiction. But in any case, thou shalt not kill doesn't have pride of place among the Ten Commandments. Various traditions differ a little in how they order the commandments, but they all give prominence to number one. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Jealous again. The Lord is jealous and avenging God. The Lord takes vengeance and is wrathful. Nahum chapter 1 verse 2. Do not worship any other God, for the Lord, whose name is a jealous God. Exodus chapter 34 verse 14. Another God of another of God's little ways, according to the Bible, is his love of the smell of burning meat, usually non-human meat, but not always. When he ordered Abram to toss Isaac on a bonfire, the reason, as Abram understood it, was God's chronic appetite for savory smoke. After making that last-minute intervention to save Isaac, God sent a ram to get its horns caught in a thicket nearby. Abram got the message, killed the poor creature, and gave God the fix of mutton smoke instead of Isaac smoke. The official Sunday school interpretation of the sudden appearance of the ram is that it was God's way of telling people to stop sacrificing humans and sacrifice animals instead. But the God character in the story was in the habit. In those days of talking to people, after all, he had told Abraham to kill Isaac, so you'd think he could have simply told them in words to sacrifice sheep instead of people. Why put poor Isaac through such a terrible ordeal? You'll find, if you read the Bible, that messages are often delivered in that kind of roundabout, symbolic way. Rather than painfully and clearly. I can't help feeling that a really nice God would have told them not to sacrifice sheep either. Why doesn't God seem to speak to people anymore, as he did to Abram? In parts of the Old Testament, he seemingly couldn't keep his mouth shut. He seemed to speak to Moses almost every day, but nobody hears a peep from him today. Or if they do, we think they need psychiatric help. Did that in itself ever make you wonder whether those old stories might not be true? Here's another story that might make you question how nice good God is. The book of Judges, chapter 11, tells of an Israelite general called Jephthah, who badly needed a victory against a rival tribe called the Ammonites. Jephthah was desperate to win, so he promised God. Jephthah promised God that if God would only give him victory over the Ammonites, he would make a burnt sacrifice of whatever or whomever he first saw on returning home after the battle. God duly gave him the victory he wanted with a very great slaughter. Poor Ammonites, you might think, but it gets worse. As luck would have it, the first person who came out of the house to congratulate Jephthah was his beloved daughter, his only daughter. She came out dancing with joy to greet her victorious father. Jephthah was horrified to remember his promise, promise to God, but he had no choice. He had to cook his daughter. God was so looking forward to the promised smell of burning. His daughter very decently agreed to be sacrificed, asking only to be allowed to go into the mountains for 2 months first, to bewail her virginity. After 2 months, she did her duty and returned. Jephthah kept his promise and promised and barbecued his daughter so God could have a nice, satisfying smoke. On this occasion, God forgot the lesson of Abraham and Isaac and didn't intervene. Sorry, daughter. Thank you for being so nice about it. And thanks too for staying a virgin, which for some reason was regarded as important for the sacrifice. Verse 39. 끝. 감사합니다.